Hello and welcome back to O3 Drop for a very special episode of Living Legend Case Files. I'm joined today by Charles Dunn, a regular at the AGE finals table, a second place calling Indianapolis participant, and of course, the U.S. Nationals champion from 2023. And I could not have a better guest to be talking about Briar Warden of Thorns with. Charles, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
I'm so grateful that you're here. You are the man who did the impossible. You LL'd Briar without using Rosetta's Thorn.
Yeah.
I got to imagine that's something you get recognized for quite a bit.
Sometimes, yeah, it's so weird having a hero like Briar who is so iconic with that Rosetta Thorn weapon, and then not able to get over the Living Legend bar with it, and so came in with the wrong weapon, but managed to get those final points for her. It was really something special.
I remember cheering you on from my place. It was a very exciting nationals. And your opponent went on to win nationals this year. So
Yeah, he did.
did that feel good? Was that kind of did you take any pride in seeing your opponent do well this year?
Yeah. Evan Hernan's a great guy. I played him obviously in the finals of the U.S. Nationals that I won.
Mhm.
I actually played him in the Swiss rounds this year at Nationals, and I beat him. But then I went on to lose the next couple, and he went on to win the whole thing. So,
Yeah.
good for him. Really happy that he actually got that win because he's a great guy, great player. So good for him. But I did get him the first time. So, and I've
Well,
never lost to him actually in rated matches. So I'll take that with a little bit of pride as well.
there we go. And I had expected to have him on to talk Zen this week, but unfortunately they threw out some bans that stopped his speed run. Um,
True.
but
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about uh, Briar. It's a Runeblade hero. It's
Hmm.
elemental. So heroes who are currently in the CC field are just getting their first taste of this really this flavor with Rosetta. And there is obviously Aurora being the lightning hero and Florian being the earth hero. Briar is both earth and lightning. Do you feel that both of these heroes represent some polarity in Briar?
Yeah, a little bit. Briar is the reason I love Briar so much is that it's such a flexible hero. It really has two very different kind of play patterns. One that's focused more on the earth side, focused around bigger attacks and possibly more defense with the embodiments of earth, and then the more lightning focus that's more go again, more go wide. And the original Briar just gets to do both of them kind of in one hero, and you can pick and choose exactly how you want to combine them. And then the newer heroes, Florian and Aurora, are obviously going to be a little bit more polarized towards that individual play style.
Mm-hmm. And so we talk about those being present in the hero. Is there anything that can be an instant tell for players approaching a matchup with Briar what type of match they're in for? Anything that stays on board, equipment, or any cards right out the gate that you know this must be an aggressive list?
Yeah, it's definitely you definitely want to look at the weapon first and foremost,
Mhm.
right? The Rosetta Thorn almost certainly means it's very aggressive Briar because it does require kind of making those non-attacks and attacks, and then you want to finish your turn with the Rosetta Thorn. Some you may even see in Living Legend, you may see some people play around with Duskblade. That
Mhm.
was a card that never really got to see much tournament play. It was actually banned like as soon as it was released.
Yeah.
So because it was just so powerful back in the time. Um, Living Legend is a relatively new format, so it's not so well explored that everyone's figured out every deck yet.
Mhm.
But it's possible that Duskblade is also a very good weapon for Briar decks. That they can play in Living Legend. If they're playing something else like Reaping Blade or something of that nature that I used for that more defensive version, maybe that's going to indicate that they're not looking to go quite as wide or quite as aggressive.
Mhm.
Similarly, the Helm armor, um, if they're using Crown of Seeds, that is generally going to be a much more defensive oriented um, Briar list.
Mhm.
But if they are running Crown of Providence or the new Face Purgatory, I think is the name of it,
I was
the
thinking
new
Face Purgatory is likely going to be the aggressive Briar headpiece.
Yeah, I think that is a very powerful piece.
Mhm.
that you may see pop up in more aggressive oriented lists.
So, often players will hear terms like a switch list. For example, Bolton either runs Raiden or the Sabers. They'll say it's either Raiden or combo. Uh, does Briar run a switch list, or if you see one sign of an archetype, are you pretty sure that that's what they'll be on all day?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. That if you see, the initial setup, it's probably not a switch list. I
Mhm.
don't think there's quite enough deck slots, and I think the composition of the decks between the different styles are rather dramatically different. Unlike something like Bolton, like your example,
Mhm.
Bolton generally only requires you to change a small handful of cards, and given the size of your deck, 80 card limit, you can generally fit in both versions because your core is still the same. In Briar, even the core cards are very different depending on how you're playing it. But that's one of the wonderful things about having such a wide card pool, is that there's so many options of what you can play in Briar.
And with a wide card pool, are there looking at generics um, for approaching a matchup against Briar? I know that there's a lot of cards right now at the Majestic level, generics that are really great at targeting certain heroes. I'm thinking of Amnesia, Erase Face, things that either take away a card's name, they take away a talent or a class. Is there anything like that that players might want to pack if they're expecting a lot of Briars in their local meta? Is this a Warmongers matchup?
Mhm. Yeah, I do think Warmonger's Diplomacy is probably one of the best cards against the traditional aggressive Briar lists.
Mhm.
It Rosetta Thorn requires you to play both a non-attack and an attack action to get that bonus 2 points of arcane damage. And so being able to shut that down with something like Warmonger's Diplomacy is one of the best options to contain that aggression. Um, Similarly, I'd say uh, Erase Face has some play into it as well. A lot of her cards care about being Earth cards if you're using Channel Not Heroic, or care about being Lightning for fusion or for other interactions. And so that may be a hate card. And of course, the classic Command and Conquer, always going to be good against decks that don't really want to block that much.
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit about Briar specific cards that players might not have seen. Obviously, Briar does have some specializations. Are those only going to be seen in the aggressive list? I'm thinking specifically of Force of Nature, which I believe gives a buff, and the
Hmm.
next time you hit, draws a card if you are playing Earth and Lightning cards. But I'm wondering, uh, not just is that a card that you see in most Briar lists, but can an Earth list even run that? Or is that specifically indicative of a more aggressive list?
So I will say that in my more defensive version that I took to U.S. Nationals last year, I was running Force of Nature, but I don't know if I ever really cast it very
Yeah.
often. It more often was just a good blocking card, and it
Mhm.
just so happened that it's a blue 3 block non-attack action, so it could block for 4 with an Embodiment of Earth token, which is very powerful. But you'll find the more aggressive lists running Channel Mount Heroic or other ways of buffing up their attacks are
Mhm.
really going to get a lot of value from casting Force of Nature and then potentially drawing extra cards off of it. So
Mhm.
that's definitely a staple card in the more aggressive Briar versions.
And Briar tends to run in the aggressive list some pretty common generics that we've seen, things like Snatch, things like Exude Confidence.
Mhm.
Are those also tells of an aggressive list, or does the fatigue oriented, maybe not even fatigue, but more defensive list, do they get value out of generics other than our Sync Belows and our Fate for Scenes?
I think those attacks, like you mentioned, Snatch, Exude Confidence, etc., those are definitely much more aggressive cards.
Mhm.
They attack for 4, so you generally want to be attacking with them, while they only block for 2. And they're not very good at blocking.
Mhm.
Sometimes you will see some cards, some of the generics on the more defensive oriented list use the 4 power attacks, or sometimes 7 power attacks, such
Mhm.
as Findell's Fighting Spirit or Wounded Bolt, because
Mhm.
those are very good at being very efficient on a 2 card hand, right? Just a single pitch plus an attack. You attack for 7 or 8 damage, or sometimes 4 if it's a 1 card, and then that's hard for your opponent to block. And if they don't block all of it, even if only 1 point gets through, then you make an Embodiment of Earth token, which is
Mhm.
very good for defense. So you can kind of turn your offense into defense. So you'll often find these kind of breakpoint cards, the ones that have 4 or 7 attack, are very common in any version of Briar.
And let's talk a little bit about how we get additional value, not just on the offense, but we've mentioned the embodiments of Earth. What does Briar need to do in order to make her hero ability relevant in either matchup? Obviously, play non-attack actions was what we mentioned for Earth. What is it for aggressive lists?
Yeah, aggressive lists need to utilize the embodiment of lightning, which requires you to play 2 separate non-attack actions. So oftentimes this will be things like Nimbalism or Channel Mount Heroic or Sonata Arcanix. These kind of cards that are very good at being aggressive as non-attack actions. They buff up your other attacks, or Sonata Arcanix draws you a card. These cards are very efficient for Briar because they help you to build those embodiments of lightning, which then allow you to play those attacks like Snatch or Exude Confidence, which don't normally have Go Again, but then you're able to cast those with Go Again and then have the action point to swing your Rosetta Thorn to finish out your turn.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I misspoke because I clearly was not around during the time of Briar. The Earth embodiment is made from attacks hitting.
Correct. Yes. Whenever an attack hits your opponent or the first time, you make an embodiment of Earth token. However, the embodiment of Earth buffs up your non-attack actions on defense. So oftentimes you'll see the more defensive ones playing the non-attack actions that block for 3, not because they want to ever cast them, but because they intend to block with them. And when you block with them with an embodiment of Earth, they're now 4 block cards. And the more aggressive Briar lists will generally be playing non-attack actions that they actively want to be playing and casting, and they don't want to be blocking, such as Nimbalism.
Yeah, so I'm curious about, let's say that in our previous turn, we were able to get our Earth embodiment or our Lightning embodiment online. What are the kind of hands that Briar players hate to see that will give their opponent an opportunity to swing back? Where do they lose value in the draw?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a saying called a Rune Blade hand, which is a term whenever your hand has either all attacks or all non-attacks. Because you do want to be playing a mixture of both for any strategy of Briar, of both attack actions and non-attacks. And sometimes you just draw all of one kind. And if you draw all non-attack actions, obviously you can't really attack. And if you draw all attack actions, they probably don't all have Go Again. So you're going to really struggle to utilize all of them. The most ideal hand has something like 2 non-attacks and 2 attack action cards. But drawing 4 of one kind can definitely lose you a lot of tempo in the Briar deck.
Yeah. And what type of players might be interested in trying Briar out?
I think Briar is probably at her strongest in Living Legend format as a more aggressive version. I just think that the aggressive shell and cards that they have printed for a more proactive strategy are just a little bit stronger. And so anybody who is looking for an aggro deck that goes wide, that presents difficult things for your opponent to block, and especially has a really powerful weapon with mixed damage in the Rosetta Thorn, is going to be really appealing to play Briar in Living Legend.
I noticed that with your list, there are a good amount of 2-ofs and 1-ofs. Do you feel that Briar gets benefit out of keeping things, pretty mixed, keeping things a bit more unexpected, or do most lists have a consistent theme of we run 3 of these, 3 of these, 3 of these because we don't need anything else? Or do you find that many Briar lists slot some less likely cards in?
I think Briar definitely has the ability to play a wider variety of cards than many other decks, and sometimes that does manifest as having a lot of 1 and 2-ofs. Just to go back to the earlier example with things like Snatch or Exude Confidence or some of the attack action cards. Those are cards that are very similar in a lot of cases, right? They are a single card that attacks for 4. And they have other text and other interactions depending on the kind of matchups you're expecting. So sometimes you'll want more Exude Confidences into a defensive deck that is trying to play reactions against you. But maybe you don't need all 3. But 1 or 2 is always good into certain matchups. And similar with a lot of her other attacks that are kind of interchangeable. There's not like a hard rule of you must always play exactly these 3 of cards because that's the only thing that works. There's very few cards that are like locked in as 3 of copies
Mhm.
for any Briar deck.
And Briar's always been considered fairly strong, if I'm correct, right?
Oh, yes.
I mean, obviously it was errata to
Mhm.
make it so that it only made 1 Earth embodiment per turn, but it was the last of the Tales of Aria heroes to hit Living Legend. Can you give us a little bit of context as to what was gatekeeping Briar from Living Legend?
So I think actually Lexi was the last one to hit Living Legend, or maybe they hit near at the same time.
Hmm.
But definitely Oldhim went first, and I know Briar definitely struggled to get over that last hump. Um, I think a lot of the meta. So yeah. So to go back to the errata that you mentioned,
Mhm.
right? So when she was first printed, she would get an embodiment of Earth for every time an attack hit. So that could be 2, 3, or more per turn if you had a lot of attacks. And then now it's been errata to only get 1, which obviously brought down her power level quite a bit.
Mhm.
That being said, she was still a very powerful hero and continued to be very present in the metagame for quite some time. However, as new sets came out and other heroes got more support, there wasn't really any sets after Tales of Aria that gave too many new cards to Briar until Rosetta came out, the namesake of her weapon. Now she obviously got a lot more support with a lot more Runeblade cards, a lot more
Mhm.
Earth, a lot more Lightning cards.
Yeah.
But prior to this, there just wasn't a lot of support, and other heroes really caught up to her.
Mhm.
And so that's why she started falling behind some of the other heroes that got printed or the other ones that got support. Like Rangers got really big buff in Outsiders, for instance.
Mhm.
And once Rangers kind of burst onto the scene, Briar struggled into them a little bit. And so that's what kind of stalled her out right on the precipice of Living Legend for a little while.
And I'm realizing now that yes, it must have been Lexi that went last because you played Briar's last game against Alexi. Um, so I wanna take another step backwards and just kind of talk about rune blades a little bit more generally for a second because I think that many people probably who have been playing CC in the last several months are used to seeing a lot of rune chants, but that's
Mhm.
not as much of what Briar does. So, what does their plan for arcane damage need to look like?
Yeah, Briar doesn't often make too many rune chants. She will still typically run Grasp of the Arknight, the legendary arm equipment that can help her make some rune chants once in a while, but it's rare that she ever has more than 1 out at a time,
Mhm.
unlike a lot of the other rune blades that we've seen, like Viscerai or Florian, who build up large stacks of them. Oftentimes, Briar gets her mixed damage value mainly from that Rosetta Thorn weapon.
Mhm.
So a typical play pattern might be play a Nimblism and then play another non-attack action, whether it be Channel Mount Heroic or Sonata Arcanic or something. That gets you an embodiment of lightning. And then you can attack with an attack action card, like Snatch or some other attack. And then you finish your turn by pitching a card to swing with your Rosetta Thorn. And depending on if you have resources, you can either have paid for an attack or made a rune chant. And that'll present a lot of physical damage, but then also a few points of arcane damage as well through the rune chant or through the Rosetta Thorn itself. And that way, you present a very difficult situation for your opponent to fully block out.
Mhm. I think we might have sort of answered this in just the way we talked about the expanding card pool for Briar, but is Briar as menacing in Living Legend today as she was in her heyday? Speaking sort of a bit more theoretically.
Mhm. I think, broadly speaking, before Rosetta the set came out, I would probably have said no. I think she was okay in Living Legend, but not, probably not top tier.
Mhm.
But she got so much support in this new set of Rosetta. Obviously, we got a lot of new Runeblade cards that she can use all of. We got a lot of new Lightning cards and a lot of new Earth cards. So I think it's still a little too early to say exactly how powerful she'll land. We also got an expansion slot card specifically for Briar, the Shock and Regrowth.
I'm just calling that the draft killer card. It's just gonna be, oh cool, I'll pick this, and then we'll have to count everyone's cards. But
yeah, and I think that that expansion slot card and then all of the extra support from Rosetta can probably take Briar up to that top tier in Living Legend.
If a player just joined in Rosetta, it's their first set. Let's say they cracked Marvel Briar, and they're really excited to get a chance to play Briar. Do you feel that they have everything that they need from Rosetta, or will they need to expand just for a playable, not a top tier deck? But does Briar get the support she needs from the Rosetta's card pool without needing a large amount of Aria bulk? Or maybe not bulk, but Aria cards.
I do think there are some really powerful cards from Aria that if you're looking to play Briar, you would do well to look to pick up. A lot of them do end up being commons or the some of the easier to acquire cards, and not necessarily even legendaries or higher rarity cards. One that comes to mind off the top of my head is Bramble Spark. This is a card that I personally am looking forward to playing again in Classic Constructed because it's such a powerful card. You can play it in Florian now. It's a non-attack action that costs 0, and if you Earth fuse it so that you have an Earth card still in your hand when you cast it, it'll give your next attack +3 power, and it'll cause that attack to deal 1 arcane damage when you attack with it. So functionally, this is a 1 card that is attacking for 4.
Do you have to Lightning Fuse to get the arcane?
No, it's just Earth Fuse.
Wow.
So it's actually slightly misspoke. It is, you always get +1 arcane damage.
Yeah.
But in order to get the bonus attack value, you have to Earth Fuse. Which admittedly is the bigger part of it. +3 is larger than 1 arcane.
Yeah.
And hopefully you're doing both. And Briar likes to play these non-attack actions to get that embodiment of lightning. So it's just a really powerful card in any Briar list, and also in Florian in Classic Constructed.
I've played a fair amount of Acilio this last week into Florians, and I seem to be the only one drawing Runeblade hands. Florian has been a menace to me recently. But any final thoughts that you have on Briar for players who are looking to expand their palette and get into Living Legend?
I think Briar is a great entry point for anybody looking to get into the Living Legend format, especially with the new set of Rosetta. It's such a flexible hero that can play just so many different cards, and there's so many different ways that you can build it and put your own unique spin on it, that I think it's a really great deck for anyone to pick up.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Charles Dunn, U.S. National Champion of 2023 and the killer of Briar. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.